This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me.
Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to the 11th Right and Left Discussion Forum. Right and Left Incorporated is a nonprofit company that was incorporated in Ohio in August of 2012 and is currently awaiting tax-exempt status from the IRS. Right and Left is a grassroots effort to promote civil discourse in politics. Our ultimate aim is to reduce the level of extreme partisanship that is crippling government at all levels. Our purpose is to work through voters to change the way we relate to each other. We will attempt to counter political intolerance that is encouraged by extreme biased talk radio, 24-hour cable news networks, and social media. Organizationally, we are patterned after Mothers Against Drunk Driving. As such, we are establishing and fine-tuning a chapter in Wadsworth, Ohio, to use as a template for replication in chapters in other communities. Each chapter will have an active presence in its community with a speakers bureau, a local access TV program, visibility at local events, and an aggressive advertising campaign and a fundraising effort. Additionally, we will have an interactive website promoting civil discourse with an endorsable belief statement, a regular newsletter, and a capacity for the exchange and dissemination of ideas. We plan a multimedia advertising effort that will use the lion's share of our budget. Our discussion forum is aimed at demonstrating that reasonable people with different political views can have reasonable discussions about contentious topics. Today's panel, beginning on my left, is Bryan Laubaugh. Bryan is president of R&D Financial Consultants and a member of the Medina County Republican Executive Committee. On his left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher at Wadsworth High School and member of the Wadsworth City Council. On her left is Jerry Ritzman, vice president and partner in Ritzman Pharmacies. On his left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. Today, our panel will discuss presidential executive orders. Bryan, as you know, U.S. presidents since George Washington have issued executive orders. But it was not until 1952 that the Supreme Court specified that presidential orders must be consistent with the expressed or implied will of the U.S. Congress or the U.S. Constitution. Even so, since 1952, some presidents have issued orders that were seen by some as going around the Congress and the Constitution and creating their own law. So I guess my question to you, Bryan, is do you think that the president's power to issue executive orders should be reined in?
The short answer is yes. The acceleration of the use of executive orders over the years has put the overall premise of our three our three branches of government almost in a precarious spot. We don't need to go into a basic civics lesson, but the Congress, the legislative branch, is responsible for creating laws. That's where we have representation. The executive branch is mainly there to, manage the affairs of the government. And when the president, and they all have, from Republicans to Democrats, they've all used executive orders to circumvent the laws or to create situations that they feel is important, and having the government carry those executive orders almost as a force of law. And that's the concern. And most presidents, and we've seen an acceleration of this over the last 20 years, where executive orders have been used to basically circumvent the Congress and put in place ideas and almost their own brand of law, and I think it really needs to be taken a hard look at and reined in significantly. You mentioned from George Washington. I think he might have issued 3 or 4, but now presidents are doing 3 or 4 a month, and you can go on to look at the National Archive, and you can see all the executive orders, how many each president has issued each and every year they've been in office, and it's just accelerating.
Yes, yes. Patty, do you think the same way as Bryan, or are you going to be a little different on this one?
I'm going to be a little different, I think. I agree with Bryan in that our opinion of executive orders many times depends upon what party is in the presidency. In this particular case, we have a Democratic president. I think the Republicans are more upset with them. When George Bush was president, it was probably the other way around. Where I disagree with them is the fact that they're getting out of hand. Really, in the last 20 years, since Roosevelt, the number of presidential executive orders has stayed pretty constant. I mean, in the last, Ronald Reagan had more than Clinton did, than Bush did, than Carter did, than Obama is.
Oddly enough, Jerry Ford had more than anybody since Roosevelt.
But he was during a short time. I think he only had 168.
When you're talking about on a monthly basis.
On a monthly basis, right. I'm looking at the total. You have to examine them, somewhere, like there were months when many were issued and other months. I think there is a necessity for them. Article 2 of the Constitution is where they're deriving the power for this. And it goes down to the line of faithfully executing the laws, and that there is concern that if the president doesn't adhere to this, then perhaps he could be removed from his office. That was the original concern. What the courts have looked at, though, is that executive orders are not to make law, or they should not get to the point where they're steering so far from the intent of the law. And that's where some of them have been overturned. I think President Bush had one that was overturned. It was actually from Gonzalez was the one who proposed it, was about releasing documents from previous presidents. And that was actually then overturned. The courts have, like I said, have overturned, and that's one way to overturn an executive order, have overturned when they felt that a law was not, it was a condition where they were making a law instead of trying to, understand it or maybe better clarify that law. The other way that they can be overturned, however, is if Congress has that 2/3 vote, whereby they can be overturned. I look, as Bryan said, you can go online and see all of these different ones. There are so many on there. Many of them are just setting up councils and advisory committees within the executive government.
Changing pay rates and things.
Changing pay rates, right. Notifying employees of, federal employees of union dues and their right to pay them or not pay them, telling them of their labor rights as federal employees. Notifications, setting up physical fitness councils. Obama passed one for Hurricane Sandy relief. And there have also been many that have been issued for national security, perhaps, making better examination of immigrants coming into the country who were terrorists, which I think is something that is probably at the front of the forefront in people's minds right now, but being able to block their property and or assets, especially after 9/11, there were a great many issued, so as to set up some of our defense systems, some security, homeland security offices. I think there are so many that have provided for good usage, and when they're not, and when they maybe step over the line, the courts already have the right to come in and change it, or the next president can overturn it.
But they don't do it very often.
They've only overturned, courts have only overturned, I think, twice an executive order. But what we have seen is where, like President Obama overturned Bush's executive order for, it had to deal with treating of non-combatants.
It had to do with torture and waterboarding.
Yes, and basically saying that terrorists are not subject to Geneva Convention rules, and therefore we don't have to follow the Geneva Convention, and that has been overturned. Also, in the release of the previous documents of former presidents, that was overturned. So there is always that option.
Jerry, what's your thinking?
My thinking is that the president's got a country to run. And if we put more restrictions on executive orders, it's only going to add to the log jam in Washington. If we don't like some of the executive orders that the president has issued, in 3 years or 3.5 years, you can get rid of him or her. So I don't think we need to put any more restrictions on them. We don't need any more. There's been some very controversial executive orders in the past that have turned out very good. I don't think it was called an executive order, but I think the Emancipation Proclamation was in effect an executive order. I think that
so was getting rid of habeas corpus. Speaking of Lincoln.
Right. I think that the integration of the armed forces was an executive order.
Yes.
I think the desegregation of schools was an executive order. They were very controversial at the time. And I think the Japanese internment was due to an executive order. There are going to be very controversial ones, but I can't see putting handcuffs or slowing down the president when action needs to be taken. There's other ways to get to it. We don't need any more laws or regulations on that. I haven't lost a lot of sleep over executive orders in the last year or so.
You say you have, or you
I
haven't?
have not a bit.
We agree.
Okay, I want to
We
circle
agree.
back to that a bit more.
Oddly enough, I find myself in complete agreement with my Republican friend here.
And we're ganging up on you, Brian.
As a matter of
Looking
fact,
at,
I think Brian's been overwhelmed.
In doing some background reading on this, I'd never really given much thought to this whole idea. I'd see an executive order come out that I agreed with and say, well, yeah, that's a good idea. Case in point might be the recent gun regulation where the Senate just blew off the opportunity to even have some debate. Maybe that's an occasion for an executive order here. I don't know. The will of the people, the common good. However, just looking at this, the old proverb comes to mind, it's better to beg for forgiveness than to get permission. In the reading, I did find one interesting rant. You can find some of those on the internet occasionally. And this fellow says, this is an approach to tyranny. We are looking for absolute monarchy here. We got to stem this. What do you think about that? Do you think it really is going that direction? Well, I don't agree with that. But you say it's always possible, and we have occasions in our history where an executive order was overturned by the Congress, vetoed by the president, and then that veto rescinded by the Congress. And that's possible. And I think that is one of the true strengths of our system, that this mechanism is available, either by just letting things lapse, sort of, or just by being able to take action for one. Again, here I'm agreeing with Bryan, so that the balance of powers in the constitutional system is maintained. And there are mechanisms to do that. But I don't lose a lot of sleep on it about it either, Jerry.
Well, I think back, when during the days of, the late in the 18th century, when Congress was out of session, you couldn't get a conference call to see if there was agreement on something. And the president was kind of on his own to manage the government. But when I think about reining in, I'm not talking about canceling, but when I think about what President Obama did relative to the DREAM Act, Congress had voted it down twice, and then he issued an executive order putting it in place. And he had ordered the Immigration and Naturalization Service to stop deporting illegals, and made it possible then for the young children of illegal immigrants to apply for I don't know, college. I don't know if they was giving them college grants, but permission to go to school.
Dream Act.
Well, it was when you think in terms of the president being allowed to issue an executive order that is consistent with the will of both implied or either implied or expressed of the Congress, that's one thing. But to do it in defiance of the Congress is something else again. I think we need to rein in. Go ahead, Patty, dump all over me.
Well, let me take a minute because
He knows I'll
my
be
good
long.
friend here attempting to filibuster. On the,
No,
the
no,
issue.
not at all.
Let's just go back, and I don't disagree that the president shouldn't have the ability to manage and administer the affairs of the government administratively, but we've seen this overreach when it comes to executive orders. Just to correct something, if Jimmy Carter was on pace, he had on average 73 executive orders per year, and he only served for 4 years, if you remember. Ronald Reagan served for 8. So obviously he had 8 years, but he was averaging in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 a month. So we want to correct that a little bit, because when you get down to these situations where executive orders are used to circumvent the law, I would be very concerned if the current administration decided to issue an executive order on a gun control or an issue that the Congress has decided not to take up. We live in a representative government, and if we're just voting for a president, then we should just vote for a president and forget the senators and the congressmen, and that's what they're there for. So yeah, I don't lose sleep over executive orders when it comes to an executive order to do the Easter egg hunt on the front lawn, or to do particular administrative issues, setting up councils that are very important. But I do lose some sleep when it comes to executive orders that are clearly an overreach. And obviously the Supreme Court, in only 2 instances, Bill Clinton's and Harry Truman's overreach trying to nationalize the steel industry, that's something that could easily be taking place. The supermajority, that's very, very difficult. And Patty, you serve on city council.
Yes.
I think maybe we should put the shoe on the other foot. What if the mayor decided that she was going to, or whoever the mayor was, that she was going to decide to do things exclusive of what the city council wanted, to decide that she's not going to enforce certain laws and enforce other laws, and to create rules and regulations that the city council really wouldn't want. So I guess that's my defense of my point. I'm not against executive orders. I think they're like, at times, that ivy that grows in your backyard that if you don't cut it back every now and again, it'll take over. So.
Well, first of all, if the mayor were to do that, which she wouldn't do, if the mayor were to do that, city council could override that. And if it were illegal, I'm sure it could be handled through the courts. And I think we already have those allowances for it. The concern that we are making laws that Congress does not agree with, or in subjects that do not agree with, and you talk about representation. Just to go on a soapbox a little bit, with the recent gun control law, over 90% of the country feels that background checks should be extended. And yet our representative organization, for various reasons, chose not to do so. So here we have a case where, yes, Congress disagreed with the president, if you're concerned with that, and that hasn't happened yet, where Congress disagreed with that. However, the majority of the country, the people that they are elected to represent, do agree. And I would look at that as where the president is saying, okay, the Congress has done this, but the people that they have been elected to represent desire this. So I don't have a problem with that.
I think it's one of the aspects of our extreme partisanship right now, that we've got, when we have one party in the White House and one in the Congress, that decisions are made based on just plain partisan cussedness.
I would agree.
And I agree with Ron. The president was elected for a reason, and he was elected by the people. And there are decisions to be made. But when he's facing an intractable Congress that is just refusing to move because they're of a different party,
Exactly.
something has to be done.
Exactly.
And that I think that executive orders are in place, but when you have a president stand up like the current president did in introducing the gun control legislation and said the Congress is going to take care of this, or I will, that is a little threatening. It's an unveiled threat. I'm going to issue executive orders to get rid of assault weapons and extend background checks, and it doesn't matter to me what the Congress thinks. I'm going to do it.
I think that's bad psychology, because you send a challenge out to Congress.
Yeah, they
you're setting
dig their
yourself
heels
up for
in.
failure.
Yeah.
One of my objections to President Obama is there was an article recently by Maureen Dowd, who's generally a pretty rabid Democrat. She says there's no bully in the pulpit.
Yes, I
Obama
read
needs
that.
to be more forceful.
Yeah.
And in this case, he also needs to do a little more schmoozing. He needs to be a little more conciliatory to Congress. He needs to get a more personal involvement, and he hasn't done that as satisfactorily as he might. Coming from a supporter, that's
Yeah.
I agree with that assessment. And here's an occasion when he maybe needed to tone his rhetoric a little bit, but still, Congress acted in, as far as I can see, not in accordance with the will of the American public in this case.
Yeah.
Should there be an opportunity for the president to somehow get around that? Or do we have to wait for the next 4 years and throw the rascals out?
Yeah.
And then we'll
There's
have
your
the rest.
mechanism right there. I mean, we vote. And if you're not happy with your congressman or your senator because of a particular issue,
Or the president.
or the president, that's the mechanism that should be put in place, not the idea of going around and issuing executive orders to circumvent the Congress. You could insert any issue, whether it's a gun issue, whether it's Planned Parenthood, you name it, you're going to have those particular grinds. But that's the beauty, I think, of the system of government that we have. We can't just sit here and say, well, because of this particular hot issue, we're going to suspend the way we govern.
I don't think he's suspended
you
the
know,
way we govern, though.
Well, I think when
He's-
we start saying things like, well, 90% of the population said this, well, there's a poll there, and we don't, as far as I'm aware, we don't govern by polls.
No, but
And
it does give you an idea of what the public feels, and there have been many
Well,
polls
sure.
on that subject.
And if the public doesn't like the way the Congress and the Senate acted, then they have a mechanism to change that.
It's kind of a philosophical point, too. If we say we elect our representatives to support what we, the electors, want, yet we say these folks ought to have the ability to vote their own conscience. They ought to have the
Yeah.
ability to follow their own conscience. And there can be a conflict there sometimes.
Absolutely.
I would agree that our senators and representatives should have the ability to make their own decisions, but I think they have to be a little more responsive than they have been in recent years anyway,
Right.
to what the people want.
I think it's probably worthwhile to keep in mind what the Supreme Court ruled in their, I guess they call it dicta. That's the conversation that the judges have outside the ruling. Anyway, in the Youngstown Sheet and Tube case, back when Truman wanted to nationalize the steel industry, and after they ruled against him, I thought the three levels, corresponding levels of presidential authority that were spelled out were worth repeating. That the president acts with the most authority when he has the express or implied consent of the Congress. Number two, the president has uncertain authority in situations where Congress has not imposed its authority, either by inaction or indifference. Then the president takes advantage of this twilight zone in executive decision making. The president acts with the least authority when he issues an executive order that is incompatible with the express will of the Congress, regardless of what the polls say, such as an act which threatens the equilibrium established by our constitutional system. That's the part that gets a little bit
See,
worrisome.
I would
to me.
put that in the middle zone even, and if you look at the gun control issue, it actually, the majority of the votes were for passage. It was because of that 60-vote filibuster that the vote went against it. What was it, 54 to 40?
Something like that.
So, yeah, 46. So that's why I say I would put that more, that we're in a position now with more in that middle category of Congress is not taking action. I don't know that it's necessarily against.
Do you know that in January of 1963, 80% of the people were in favor of military action in Vietnam? 80%.
Oh,
And then
That changed.
and in 2003, I think it was 68% were in favor of invading Iraq.
based upon the facts that were given to them at the time, yes.
Yes.
Are you going to pick on me
Supposed
about
fact.
No, I am not going to go any farther with that.
We talked about weapons of mass destruction. Obviously, we're there because it was reported in the internet, right?
Yeah, had to be true.
Well, that had to be accurate then. Well, this has been a very nice discussion. I appreciate it, and thank you very much. And I want to thank all the people who joined us today and listened to this discussion. And to learn more about Right and Left, please visit our temporary website at rightandleft.org. Or to become a volunteer or contribute to Right and Left Incorporated, or to comment on today's discussion, contact me, John Grom, at 330-336-2213. And I would like to leave you with this quote. This was on the wall of my speech class in high school in 1956. All along the wall it said, every person has a right to their own opinion. No one has a right to be wrong about the facts on which their opinion is based. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you.